They built the gallows by lantern light. The carpenter was an old man, half drunk on rye whiskey, and his hammer echoed in the cold night air like a ticking clock. Every knock against would seem to remind the town of what they had decided to do by sunrise. The square was empty, save for the flicker of torches and the murmurs of men who wouldn't meet each other's eyes. They nailed the frame into place, then the crossbeam, then the thick hemp rope. Not a word was spoken about who would hang at dawn, but everyone knew. The whisper had spread like wildfire across the red dust streets of Redstone Bluff. The girl's to be hanged. The one with the baby. The one who tempted the mayor's stable boy. The thief. Her name was Annalise Gray. She had come into town 6 weeks earlier with nothing but torn shoes, swollen feet, and a stomach heavy with child. Her face was gaunt, her eyes too tired to beg, and yet she walked upright. No shame, no tears. She came from the east, she said, but few believed her. Some claimed they saw her talking to herself near the riverbed. Others swore she spoke in tongues. But what sealed her fate was not superstition or fear. It was the brooch. Mayor Gideon Hale's wife reported it missing the day after Annalise helped clean their parlor. The very next morning, the preacher's silver cross vanished. The sheriff, a tired and bitter man named Brant McAllister, didn't need much convincing. He dragged Annalise into the jailhouse, the townspeople watching from behind curtains and porch rails. No one asked for her side of the story. No one offered her water. She didn't speak. She only held her belly. Sheriff Brant said she stole, that she was carrying a bastard, that she had tempted decent men, that she refused to name the father, that her silence was guilt. And the mayor, stern, respectable Gideon Hale, signed her execution order without a second thought. She was to be hanged at dawn. And so, as the moon rose high and cold over Redstone Bluff, the gallows stood ready. Wind rocked the noose gently, as if rehearsing the morning's final act. No one knew that within hours, every name in the square would be covered in shame. No one knew that Annalise Gray carried more than a baby. She carried the town's greatest secret and its reckoning. It was still dark when the town began to stir. The jailhouse sat at the far end of Main Street. No windows, one iron door, and a single oil lamp burning behind the sheriff's desk. Sheriff Brant hadn't slept. He hadn't taken off his boots. He sat with his elbows on his knees, watching Annalise from across the cell bars, like she might vanish if he blinked. She hadn't spoken in hours. Her face was pale, her eyes closed, her breath slow. The baby had come 2 nights ago, inside that cell, without a midwife, without towels, without prayers. Brant had brought in a bucket of hot water and walked out before the girl began to scream. Now the infant lay bundled in old cloth, curled against her chest. A boy. Brant rubbed his eyes. Somewhere in him was a whisper of doubt, a flicker of something he'd buried long ago. But he squashed it. He had a job to do. The sun wasn't up yet when the preacher arrived. Reverend Claiborne was a tall, spindly man with a trembling voice and eyes always 2 steps from tears. He looked at the girl through the bars and said a quiet prayer. Annalise said nothing in return. Outside, footsteps crunched on frost. Men were gathering. Brant rose. He unlocked the door and stood over her. "It's time." Annalise looked up. "I want to carry him," she said, voice cracked with exhaustion. "You'll hand him off at the gallows," Brant replied. She stood slowly. Her knees trembled, but she didn't fall. The baby stirred and whimpered. She kissed his cheek and wrapped him tight. The jailhouse door opened, and the air outside was sharper than any knife. The town square was already full. They had come in silence, bundled in coats and shawls, boots dusted white from frost. No one smiled. No one spoke. They simply watched. The gallows stood tall and hateful, a black skeleton in the early light. Annalise walked beside Brant with her head held high. Her feet were bare. Her steps were slow. The baby was quiet. As they reached the platform, murmurs moved through the crowd. People leaned forward, craning their necks. A few women whispered prayers. Children clutched their father's hands. Brant turned to the hangman and nodded. The man stepped forward, lifting the noose. That's when it happened. Annalise shifted the baby in her arms. The cloth fell slightly from the child's face, and the mayor's wife gasped. A full gasp, loud and sharp. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Gideon," she whispered, eyes wide. "Gideon, look at him." The mayor stepped forward, brow furrowed, unsure. The baby blinked up at the sky, and the crowd began to murmur louder now. The child had blue eyes. Piercing. Familiar. Someone else gasped. Then someone said it. He looks like the mayor. The silence shattered. A roar of voices swelled. People turned to Gideon. Men pointed. Women clutched each other. Even the hangman took a step back. Brant's mouth opened, but no words came out. And Annalise, tired and trembling, spoke just 3 words. He knows it. Gideon Hale went white as a corpse. His hands trembled. His lip quivered. His eyes met Annalise's, and in that one glance, every lie he'd ever told unraveled like thread in the wind. The sheriff turned slowly. You, he whispered. The mayor backed away, shaking his head. It's not. But it was. Everyone saw it. The baby had the mayor's eyes. And suddenly the girl who was about to hang for temptation and theft wasn't a stranger anymore. She was the proof of something Gideon Hale had buried months ago. Something scandalous. Something criminal. Something alive. The crowd did not move. It was as if the breath had been stolen from the lungs of every man, woman, and child standing beneath the gallows. The winter sun crept over the hills behind Redstone Bluff, its light crawling across rooftops and windows, but no one noticed. All eyes were locked on the infant in Annalise's arms, his wide blue eyes blinking innocently up at a sky too cold for mercy. Mayor Gideon Hale had stepped back from the platform. His face, once stony and proud, now looked like a crumbling cliff, lips dry, forehead damp, eyes darting as if seeking a place to hide. Sheriff Brant McAllister didn't speak. Not yet. Not until he saw what the people would do with the truth they were just now beginning to taste. You said nothing, Gideon hissed under his breath, glaring at Annalise. I said everything, she replied softly, with the only voice I had left. She shifted the baby against her chest. He whimpered, then fell back to sleep. The preacher stood silent beside the gallows, his prayer forgotten. And somewhere at the edge of the crowd, someone spoke the name that would soon tumble from a dozen lips. Clara, get Clara Wendell. The midwife. Sheriff Brant's head snapped up. Clara. That name landed like a stone in his chest. He hadn't thought of Clara Wendell in weeks. Not since the baby had come screaming into the world 2 nights ago in the back room of the jail, and he'd refused to stay and help. But she had helped, and she knew. Brant turned to a deputy. Find Clara. Bring her here. Now. The man ran. Gideon swallowed hard and looked around like a cornered animal. This is madness, he barked. A baby looks like a lot of men. Blue eyes don't mean a thing. Annalise spoke gently. He doesn't just have your eyes. He has your birthmark. On his shoulder. Just like you. The mayor's face went pale. You're lying. You'd have to look to be sure, she said. But you won't. People murmured again. A few stepped closer. The gallows creaked in the breeze, ropes swaying like a pendulum. The hangman took a long step back. For 10 more minutes, nothing else happened. Then the crowd parted. Clara Wendell arrived. She wore a plain gray shawl over her bonnet and held a black satchel in one hand. Her face was lined with years of labor, but her eyes, bright green and unblinking, were sharper than ever. She approached slowly, boots crunching frost, and stopped at the foot of the gallows. Sheriff, she said. Brant nodded. Clara, I need the truth. What did you see when you delivered the child? Clara looked up at Annalise. The girl nodded once. Permission. Clara climbed the steps. The crowd watched in breathless silence as the midwife approached the baby and gently lifted the cloth from his shoulder. The infant stirred but didn't cry. A soft gasp rippled through the crowd. Clara stepped back, turned, and spoke loud enough for all to hear. He has a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon. Upper left shoulder. Just like Mayor Hale. A woman shrieked. Another shouted, Lord have mercy. Someone else cried, she weren't lying. The mayor raised his hand. That's coincidence. There are other children born with marks like that. Clara cut him off. Not with that color. That shape. That placement. I've delivered over 200 babies in this town, Gideon. I've only ever seen it once before. She pointed at him. On you. Mayor Hale's lips moved, but no sound came out. His eyes darted left, right, toward the road out of town. But the townsfolk were moving now, slowly surrounding the gallows like wolves around a wounded elk. What else do you know, Clara? Sheriff Brant asked, voice low. The midwife hesitated. Then, I know this girl told me the father was powerful. That he paid her once, promised more, then told her if she ever came to town again, he'd make sure she disappeared. Annalise bowed her head. I came anyway, she whispered. I was hungry. I was tired. And I wanted my son to know his name. And the brooch? Brant asked. The preacher's cross? I never took them, Annalise said. They planted them in my bag when I was resting behind the chapel. More murmurs. Eyes turned toward the sheriff now. He stood still, fists clenched. I did my job, he said. I followed the evidence. Clara stepped down and faced him. Your job, she said quietly, was to listen. The silence that followed was the kind that bends the bones. Then, from the edge of the crowd, a woman shouted, We've been lied to. Another voice. The mayor's the one who ought to swing. Gideon turned and bolted. But he didn't get far. Two men grabbed him by the coat before he reached the livery and dragged him back to the gallows. Brant stood motionless, watching. Gideon struggled. Let me go? You've got no proof. She's a witch, a liar. But no one believed him now. Not with the baby so quiet. Not with the eyes of the town staring holes through his soul. Should we hang him? Someone shouted. No, said another. Let the judge come from Claypool. Make it legal. Legal like she got? Someone else snapped. The air turned violent. Brant raised his hands. Enough, he shouted. There will be no blood in the square today. But there nearly was, a woman cried. You were going to hang a mother. Brant turned to Annalise. She looked back at him with tears now, real ones. Not for herself, but for what could have been. I'm sorry, Brant said, loud enough for all to hear. To her. To the child. And to every person who ever believed a lie because it came from the lips of someone powerful. He walked to the gallows, took the noose in his hands, and cut it down with a hunter's knife. It fell to the wood like a dead thing. He turned to Gideon. You'll be held in the jail until the judge rides in. And may God have more mercy on you than you ever had for her. Gideon Hale was dragged away, crying out about conspiracies, about women ruining men, about curses. But no one listened anymore. Later that morning, as the frost melted and the gallows stood empty, Annalise sat beside the fire in the preacher's home. The baby fed quietly. Clara sat nearby, darning a torn cloth. Brant stood by the window, staring out at the street. She'll need a place, Clara said. Brant nodded. I've got room at my sister's. She passed last winter. The house is clean. She can stay as long as she needs. Annalise looked up, uncertain. You'd do that for me? Brant turned. No. I'd do that for the boy. For what I almost allowed to happen. And because someone ought to show this town that not all men with a badge are blind. The fire crackled. The baby yawned. Outside, the gallows were torn down by the same carpenter who built them, this time with tears on his cheeks. And inside the preacher's home, the girl they tried to hang kissed her son's brow and whispered the first name he would ever know. Elias. The boy blinked up at her. And the town of Redstone Bluff would never forget the day they almost killed a mother. Because of a man who refused to admit his sins. The square had never been quieter. Sheriff Brant McAllister stood frozen beside the gallows, one hand near the grip of his revolver, the other hanging limp. The mayor's mouth was still moving, stammering, denying, but his voice was barely a breath beneath the rising murmurs. And then the scream came. A single voice, loud and shaking with fury. Get your hands off my daughter. Heads turned. The crowd parted like the sea before judgment. A figure strode forward through the fog, wide-brim hat low, dust on his coat, boots cracking frost with every step. The man was built like a mountain and burned like a storm. Who the hell is that? Brant whispered, stepping down from the gallows. The man didn't stop walking. I said. The voice boomed again. That's my daughter. The baby in Annalise's arms let out a tiny cry. She swayed but didn't collapse. Her eyes were wide, disbelieving. Pa. The man took the steps 2 at a time and stood before her on the gallows platform. The rope swung just inches above his head. I've been looking for you all over this godforsaken territory, he said, voice thick with dust and emotion. And I come here to find a rope around your neck. He turned. His eyes met Brant's. What the hell's going on in this town? Brant swallowed hard. She was caught thieving. Mayor signed the papers. Law's the law. The rancher narrowed his eyes. That ain't law. That's cowardice in a badge. He looked out at the crowd. My name's Malachi Gray. And this here's my daughter, Annalise Gray. I sent her west to escape a sickness in our valley. I didn't know she was carrying. Didn't know where she went. But I know my girl. And I know lies when I hear 'em. He turned to the mayor, pointing a finger that shook. You put your hands on her. You lied to your wife. You buried the truth in that child's face. The mayor trembled. He opened his mouth, but it was too late. The crowd had heard enough. A woman in the front, a dressmaker, stepped forward. I saw the mayor visit the girl's boarding room. Late nights. More than once. Another voice. My husband said the mayor paid the stable boy to say it was him. Another. She never even stole that brooch. I remember. His wife dropped it. I saw it with my own eyes. The town unraveled in a heartbeat. And Gideon Hale, once proud, once untouchable, fell to his knees. I didn't mean, he whispered, reaching toward the baby. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Malachi took one step forward, fist clenched. You try touching that child, and you'll be swinging from that rope yourself. Sheriff Brandt looked from the mayor, to the gallows, to the angry faces of the townspeople. The law was no longer written on paper. It was written in their eyes. The wind had changed. Not just the usual sweep of dry prairie air across Redstone Bluff, but something deeper, cooler, heavier, like a ghost exhaling across the rooftops. The kind of wind that makes people remember. That turns every creaking sign and clattering shutter into a question with no answer. The gallows stood empty. The noose dangled like a forgotten promise, its purpose unfulfilled. Beneath it, the crowd remained, stunned into silence by the truth that had cracked open like thunder over the square. A child's face had done what no sermon, no badge, no courtroom ever could. It had exposed a lie. Annalise sat at the edge of the platform, barefoot and shivering, her baby clutched tight in her arms. Her hair, damp with sweat, stuck to her cheeks. Blood still stained the hem of her shift. But her back remained straight, her chin lifted. Across from her, the mayor stood frozen. His coat flapped in the wind, but he didn't move. Malachi, the rancher who'd shouted for her before the noose dropped, had not left her side. He stood now like a wall between her and the rest of Redstone Bluff. The sheriff removed his hat. Sheriff Brandt McAllister had always carried himself like a man carved from stone. Unyielding, blunt. But now, his shoulders sagged beneath a weight he could no longer carry. The badge on his chest seemed to burn through the fabric. He stepped forward slowly. His boots hit the wooden steps of the gallows with finality. I reckon you all want me to say something. No one responded. No one moved. Brandt looked down at Annalise, at the infant blinking up at the sky, then back to the crowd. I let this happen, he said, voice low but clear. I did. The wind rustled. I knew she weren't no thief. I knew the mayor had been sneaking around when he thought no one noticed. But I told myself it wasn't my concern. I told myself keeping order meant looking the other way. He turned to Gideon Hale, who hadn't met anyone's eyes since the gasp that had given him away. You lied, Brandt said loud now. You had a child with her. And then you let her rot in my jail. The crowd began to shift. Quiet murmurs. Mothers pulling children close. Husbands exchanging glances. She didn't tempt no one. You came to her. And when she got with child, you let her be paraded through town like trash. The mayor opened his mouth, but no words came. You left her to die, Gideon. You left your own blood to swing. A woman sobbed. Someone else cursed. And I helped you do it, Brandt said, swallowing hard. God help me. I let it happen. He reached up and unpinned the badge from his vest, held it in his palm like a stone, then laid it gently on the floorboards of the gallows beside Annalise. I ain't sheriff no more. The crowd didn't cheer, didn't clap, but a sound began, low and solemn. It was the clop of boots across wood. The preacher, Reverend Claiborne, stepped forward next. His Bible shook in his hands. I baptized 3 babies last year, he said, his voice trembling. Buried 5 men who died with less sin on their souls than what we saw today. He turned to Annalise. I failed you, he whispered. She didn't respond. Redstone Bluff has no right to hang you, he said louder now. It's this town that should hang its head. A murmur of agreement rippled through the square. From the back of the crowd, the midwife appeared. Hetty Sanders, old and stooped, but eyes like iron. I was called a witch once for helping a girl give birth out of wedlock, she said. But that was a baby, not a sin. And this one's no different. She limped to the front and laid down a quilt beside Annalise. Patchwork, faded, but warm. Annalise blinked in surprise as Hetty draped it over her shoulders. You don't got to leave here cold, child, Hetty said. Others followed. Jonas the blacksmith removed his gloves and handed over a tin of fresh water. The baker's wife brought a loaf wrapped in wax paper. A young boy pushed forward with a bundle of flowers, wild and dry, but bright. The mayor finally spoke. He croaked. I was afraid. Brant turned on him. Afraid of what? The truth? Your wife. Mayor Hale shook his head, pale and stammering. I loved her. Gasps. Annalise flinched. You loved her? Malachi barked. You left her to die. I thought if people knew. She never asked you for anything, Annalise said, voice soft but slicing. Not a coin. Not a ring. All I ever wanted was to live. But you made sure that living would be a crime. The mayor stepped back as if slapped. Annalise stood. Slowly. Shakily. But on her own. This boy is yours. And someday he'll ask who his father was. And I'll tell him. A man who was too afraid to speak and too proud to kneel. She turned away from him. The crowd parted to let her down from the gallows. As her feet touched the earth, something shifted. The spell of silence broke. Whispers turned to voices. Faces turned to each other. Shame rippled through the square like thunder. No trial was held for Gideon Hale. He left town 2 days later with a single bag and a downturned head. No one stopped him. No one spoke to him. He was never heard from again. Brant left, too. Rode south on a dust-colored horse. Some say he settled near Tombstone and opened a general store. Others say he died alone in the desert. Either way, his badge never made it off the gallows. Redstone Bluff changed. They tore down the jailhouse, turned it into a school. They offered Annalise a room in the parsonage, but she declined. Instead, she took over the old schoolhouse at the edge of town, taught children their letters by day, and stitched clothes by night. Her son grew fast, blue eyes shining, curls like the wild grass. They named him Justice. No man dared court her. None dared question her.